Whoops.
All right, welcome to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the bead, pour white lightning straight onto your brain. Although today's white lightning might be bourbon, because that's what the internet says is the best recipe for a hot toddy, and I might need one.
It doesn't hurt. It could hurt, but screw it. All
right, well, we're going to start with, what are we starting with? Are we starting with the Dragon Reborn?
Yeah, let's do Wheel of Time first, because that's a specific audience for us. And then if they want to stick around for the rest, we'll
Dragon Reborn. It's flip a coin for me of this or the next one, of which is the best, which is my favorite in the series.
And this is the original, the one I found on the side of the road, right here.
So right off the bat with the prologue, as is usual, we get, so the as far as I can recall, all of the prologues are setting up something down the road. I mean, even to the very first prologue, which goes way back to set something up way ahead, right? And you had that last time because the prologue with in the Great Hunt was boars and the little dark friend get together, picnic and barbecue, and you don't see a lot of payoff there until way down the road. I mean, boars doesn't show up again until way down the line, and you're not even sure who he is for a bit. And then all of those other people that he sees, you can guess by the end of the book that the Shinarin that he saw was Ingtar. But then there you have to do more guessing for the rest of it. And then here we have Pedron Niall. We see him for the first time.
I just looked up the pronunciation in the back. Pedron Niall.
Pedron Niall. Okay.
So it's like Pedro, but
yeah. Which makes sense because there's a lot of Iberian Mediterranean influence on that southern coast, or all along the whole coast, really.
Well, except he's a Whitecloak, so we don't know where he's from.
So he could be from anywhere.
He could be from anywhere.
But we see him, and the thing I like about this scene with this introduction of him is this is, I think, our first real introduction to the variety of motivations for the different antagonists. It's not just good versus evil. You can certainly make the case that a lot of Whitecloaks are evil because they do evil things, even if they think they're doing it for the right.
Well, we're getting in that semantic argument of what is evil.
Yeah.
You know, they're doing good by their definition of good versus us as Western society looking in from the outside, reading a book. It's like, that's bad because it brings incarnations of like Salem witch trials or Inquisition, time period.
Yeah, right. And so when you get more scenes later down the road with the Whitecloaks and you start to see more of the questioners, that's a little more cut and dry of, okay, these guys are evil. But a lot of the Whitecloaks, especially guys like Pedron Niall and like Bornhold, who we've talked about quite a bit, even though he's a small character, but he kind of stands big because of the character. And Niall is like that he's got noble intentions, at least, but
he believes. He believes, and if again, this is the argument of good and evil. He believes in this thing, and if you believe in this thing, then what he's doing is good.
Right. The other thing that Pedron Niall gives us here, and I was trying to find it and I couldn't. I'm annoyed that I saw one of those pie chart memes for conflict in the Wheel of Time. It was small little slice of dark friends, shadow spawn, politics, and then this giant piece of lack of communication. And I thought it was amusing and true on multiple levels because it's not just
Well, I have that
conflict on.
one,
Oh, you do have that one.
so we'll use it for our thumbnail here.
Yeah, it's not just conflict on the grand scale either, because it's not just the, you know, sometimes that leads to pitched battles and wars, but it's even interpersonal conflicts and even intrapersonal conflicts. Um, Perrin's a good example of that, and we're about to get to him because the first chunk of the book is from Perrin's perspective of intrapersonal conflict, because he won't honestly communicate with himself. It takes him a long time to communicate with Moiraine, even though he can tell she knows something about the wolfness. And it takes him a long time to actually open up and ask her about it, see what she knows. I think you see that here with Niall. He's making grand plans based on not just a limited information, but that's compounded by the fact that he has unwarranted self-confidence, and unwarranted to a degree, because I think that's why Jordan goes into such detail describing his kind of throne room, so to speak, and the battle banners arrayed behind him, because he is considered one of the great commanders. You know, that term comes up a few times through the series, especially later on. There are a kind of a literal handful of great captains living, and Niall is considered one of those. And you see all the banners to prove that on the battlefield, he certainly has warranted self-confidence, but he is absolutely certain in what he is doing, because he is certain of his reading of events and history and prophecy, and that's a little tenuous.
Yeah, now we're skirting the line between competence and narcissism, right? And we can't deny he has competence, so we can't really justly call him narcissistic. We might call him Machiavellian, but not specifically narcissistic. But we got, in game theory, we got a little, what we would call this is a signal error. So he's making decisions based on the signal, and he is competent in his decisions if the signal is correct. But because there's a signal error in actually multiple ways, as we see with Bors in the previous book, well, obviously Bors is one of his underlings, right? And so we've got this signal error coming in, and if all the information was correct, he would be making all the right decisions.
Yeah. Well, we have Bors again here too, because Bors comes in to give a report to Niall, and then the second half of the prologue.
Wait. Spoiler alert, Jazz Hands. Do we know that is Bors yet? Because I don't think you find that out till
that's this here, because this is where the Madral shows up to Carradine.
Oh, okay.
And it calls him.
I thought that happened later for some reason.
No, that's here. This is
it is the last part of this. Okay.
Yeah, the last part of this prologue is the Madral shows up in Carradine's quarters. And
for some reason I didn't think that happened till Ibudar, so which would have been way later.
Yeah, that happens again, but that's something else.
Okay.
Yeah. That happens again under different circumstances. I think that's all I had for the prologue. Did you have anything else for that?
No, I think my contribution was what I just said.
So the opening of the chapter, I like that we're getting this from Perrin's point of view. And this is a good illustration of something Jordan does so well, which is you don't see the shark. He doesn't explain everything. So how are these women just showing up? Why are these women just showing up? What are they telling Moiraine? We never know. He does not explain it. And if trying to push for information, but this is part of Perrin's thought process is, she's just going to look at him, right? So we don't know what's going on here. So we have a nice bit of mystery and fantasy of, is this part of Moiraine's scheming ability? How much of this is the power that these women just know how to find her? What's going on here, and we don't know, and I like that.
This was the graph he was talking about. If I have it correct, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I did use it for the thumbnail on one of the, but then I changed the thumbnail later because we talked about Nynaeve in the tower. So I used the accepted tests to patients with Nynaeve, and I feel like I'm being attacked one instead. So I changed it so we still have this one to use. So I think it'll be good. And you're talking about it kind of plays in exactly what you're talking, because everybody's watching this, and these boys that don't know anything, but they know they've been through hell in the last month or two. They're like, just fill us in, but you're still scheming. So now we still can't trust you, even though you're the person we have to go to because we need to survive in this world.
The other thing that jumps out at me in this chapter is this a shift in Perrin's character, because we see him arguing with the Tinker Woman and getting angry, and it's pretty un-Perrin like, especially with how we last saw him in the Great Hunt, where he had become kind of resigned to things. Plus, you start to see his adamant anti-wolfness here, because there's that tickle in the back of his mind, because he's out in the middle of nowhere and there are definitely wolves around, so he can sense them, and he's having to stubbornly and adamantly shut himself off. This is kind of a rhetorical question, because I'm actually going to come back around to this here in a few chapters. I was curious what your thoughts were on that, and if this was a change or a shift or something out of character for Perrin.
No, because you see this with this kind of personality type a lot, is they bottle it up until all of a sudden something triggers them emotionally. And we see the two parts of Perrin's character, which is the gentle giant, and then we're going to see the stalwart kind of solid warrior type come out at some point here soon. And that gentle giant, and that duality, well, he's got a spot in his heart for the Tinkers, because the gentle giant wants nothing better but to protect those that want to be good and be basically non-violent. And he is intrigued by the way of the leaf. We see this, we see this throughout all the books, and we've seen it already. He's intrigued by it because he loves it. I mean, he has fallen in love with the way of the leaf, but he also is a realist.
He wants that to be the way of the world, but it's conflicted against the fact that he has literally seen firsthand how it cannot be, because there are things of pure evil that would just burn the world to ash if everyone followed the way of the leaf.
Also, we'll go into the big 5 personality traits. Perrin is high in agreeableness. And what we do see with people who are high in agreeableness, they tend to be more disagreeable with people they love. He is in love with the way of the leaf. And so he is more likely to push hard against this person in general, not because he knows the person particularly, but because he understands the lifestyle. He wants it so bad, but he knows it can't happen. So he is having this moment of disagreeableness, mainly because he wants that so much. Ooh, that could be a whole episode in itself. I'm gonna get some studying done. I'm going to characterize the big 5 traits with all of the main characters, and we'll see what comes out of that. But I would say Perrin is very high in agreeableness.
Yeah. Well, it's my turn to get nerdy here, because what I was going to do on a bigger scale. So page 47, Loyal in Perrin and Min, and Loyal gets to talking about Taverin, which annoys Perrin because he doesn't like this. He doesn't like the lack of choice. He doesn't like being pulled along by the pattern when he wants to have choice to do the things that he thinks are right, not what this metaphysical thing wants him to do.
Should I just leave free will up in the bookcase every time?
No, I mean, you should, because that's so much of what the philosophy of this book is about.
What did I put up? Oh, Rationality, Steven Pinker. That's a good one.
But where I was going with this, so we've talked about the free will in the pattern in Tavern, but to me, this is another marker of Jordan's, where I think the Wheel of Time gets so interesting is his bachelor's was in physics, but he clearly is a history buff.
Mm-hmm.
He knows a lot of history and mythology. He weaves that into his stories a lot. And there's something dorky called historiography, which is kind of the methods, the philosophies, the schools of history and how you tell history. And there's a school called the Great Man Theory. The Wikipedia entry on it is actually not too bad. It was popularized, started basically by a Scottish philosopher, Thomas Carlyle, who said that the history of the world is but the biography of great men. And so that's how this school views history, is a series of great men shaping history and pushing history along its path. And
we've got to be a little more progressive here. Great men and women.
Queen Victoria would definitely fit into that category of the great man.
Or you could use men as like humanity.
But it's the point of the theory, though, is it's individuals, right? Mm-hmm. So there was a theory that came along afterwards that directly contrasted with it, which was more about the bottom up. That was lots of little events from the bottom pushing up, and that is what. But I digress. So, but what I think rather purposefully what Jordan is doing here is giving you a kind of mystical fantasy explanation for the great man idea, because he does talk about. Does he mention it here? No, he doesn't mention any of the others, but they do mention Hawkwing previously when they talk about Tavern, and they mention it again of people saying they could feel like the pattern itself was shifting in that very room, and we'll see some examples of that as we go down, of people who say and do things and then suddenly go, wait, what? Around the Three Tavern, especially Rand. But I think that's what he's doing here, is he's giving you a kind of logical, so to speak, logical within the realm of his world way that happens.
Well, and the more we connect, as we have in the past two books, the dream world with the regular world being kind of the hub between all the alternate dimensions of reality, the more. So I used to think, to some degree, and it didn't take away from the books for me, but I still would think, well, Jordan would sometimes conveniently use Tavern to push a story plot. But the more we've talked about the metaphysics lately, and again, this is why reading books at different times in your life is important, because I understand the metaphysics more, is that the concept of need is so important in the dream world. And the more Rand or Perrin or Matt seem to need a particular weaving of the pattern, the more likely it is for that interplay, for where someone makes a decision they normally wouldn't have made, to happen. And I think Jordan may have unconsciously did it, but he did it kind of in that pattern.
And it's interesting that you bring that up, because I was the same way in my first readings of the series, is that the Tavern sometimes annoyed me because it sometimes seemed too much like a Deus Ex Machina. And it's like, that's Deus Ex Machina is generally frowned upon in writing because it's generally considered lazy. It's you use it too much and things get boring because things happen because they're supposed to happen. And it's like, well, you don't feel like the characters have any agency. Then you don't feel like they're doing anything. They're just along for the ride. And since you're living vicariously through them, you're just along for the ride. But something I hadn't really thought of before until you were talking is that another way it balances, and I don't want to get too much into it because that's going to get into spoiler territory, but there's something you're going to see in the opening of in the first few chapters of the next book, and the order of the pattern pushing itself around the tavern is contrasted with the Dark One trying to exert his influence. Hello, Hambone. And the Dark One is pure entropy. He's pure chaos. That's what he is. In fact, the book 6 is the Lord of Chaos, because that's one of his titles. So
no, you can't get massage in the massage chair.
You do have this Deus Ex Machina on the side of order, but then it's battling the same thing on the side of chaos, because there are times where pure chaos, pure entropy, and the
and I turn it on.
I think you freak him out.
He looks comfortable.
Spaz out and claw it. But there are times where the opposite seems to happen, where the pattern seems to unnaturally, because it is unnatural in that it's from an outside force, seems to be trying to unravel, and instead of everything going right, everything's going wrong.
Which is funny, because we talk about fate and free will and everything. It's almost like the Dark One is a manifestation of trying to take control of actually having free will versus this planned pattern. And that might be a discussion in on itself. You know, you take the religious bend, the God has a plan for me, and the devil comes in and no longer utopia, because he convinced Eve to do the wrong thing. And it's almost
that's getting deep down the rabbit hole, because was that the devil's plan or was that God's plan?
Exactly. So now we got this. But even in this world, you've got the creator who is over everything, who creates the pattern, but seems to have done like that little thing on the desk where you drop it and it goes.
It's the Clockmaker theory. So
yeah.
I can't remember who put this forth most prominently, but it was we're gonna get quite down the
because where we could go with that is when we really look at these characters. We just saw it with Pedron. Is anybody who's extreme to one or the other is a bad guy, whether it's light or dark. And the creator, in essence, maybe it's very existentially neutral. And there is a little bit of light and dark in everything.
That's why I think that all caps voice at the end of Eye of the World was the creator, because I will not take part. Because I think what Jordan has set up here is, and I don't know his personal theology, but I think this goes to his knowledge of history and philosophy and mythology. The idea that science and religion are inextricably opposed is a great big lie if you look at history and you look at the great scientists of history. Descartes, Newton, all of these men were extremely devout and said explicitly,
even Darwin was religious,
and said explicitly that what they were trying to do with science was understand God, understand God's creation, understand how God created things. And some of them, and they there were philosophical, metaphysical debates about this, and I'm trying to remember, I'm not going to look it up or I'll go down a rabbit hole. But anyway, one of the ideas of how you squared the circle of God and nature, of God the creator and the seeming chaos of the natural world, was God as a clockmaker. God made the clock, and then he wound it, and then he let it go. And I think that is what Jordan's idea was when he set up the creator and the pattern. The creator created the wheel and the one power to drive the wheel and then sat back and let it go. And the Dark One is inexorably opposed to that and wants to destroy the wheel, break time itself.
Again, religious parallels. He is trying to ascend the throne of heaven, basically. And whether he succeeds or not determines how things play out in the long run.
Okay, well,
yeah, we need to get back to the book. Yeah.
Before we get even further down that rabbit hole, here's another rabbit hole, because my next thought was page 50-ish. So these series of pages here where
I'm trying to think of the sequence of events here, because Rand goes through his little crazy moments, I think.
Exactly. So they get into the camp of the dragon here in this secluded little vale. And as they come in, Perrin sees Rand come storming out of Moraine's cabin and stalking off to his little hidey hole. And then Perrin goes after him to talk to him, because he's kind of one of the only ones that Rand will actually talk to like a human being. And this is where I was going to let you kind of, take it in your thoughts on this, but everyone is constantly concerned that Rand is going to go, or is already going mad. Even he himself. And what I think you see in this first descent into madness is really a descent into stress-induced anxiety, and that is actually driving him crazy.
Everything is a spectrum, though. So stress-induced anxiety at a certain level ends up being madness. The more your, in this case, anxiety dominates your thought process, the less attached to reality you become. Because in this case, well, again, we're going back to fate versus free will. At this point, he is, by all matter of story, fated to go mad, right? There's nothing he can do about it. He's going to go mad. And what happens in the process? Does he save the world? Does he break the world? That's kind of up in the air when it comes to the
fated to go mad and to die. His blood on the rocks of Shao Ghul. He knows this prophecy, and so he's got that as well. I'm going to go mad and die. I mean, one is bad, but now both together, it's even more. And he literally has the weight of the world on his shoulders, as he's the chosen one who has to battle the Dark One.
And remember, we're months away from just chopping wood and taking care of the farm.
Yeah.
This is a very rapid process.
Well, they have been a number of months in the mountains here, so we might be at about a full year since the opening of the story. Might be.
Well, yeah, yes, if you count the months they lost going through the portal stone.
Yeah.
But in his experienced life,
that's a good point. Relatively speaking,
yeah,
he didn't feel those months, so he didn't have
take the trauma of him going through those other lives too, which I think it's such a blip in all the books that people forget about that.
Yeah.
I mean, it was enough to make Ingtar go to the light. It was a traumatic moment for everybody involved. And I think this might be a little bit of a failure on Jordan's part, because he could have referenced that a couple times later.
Yeah.
Right? And like when someone's making a big decision, they remember something from one of those lives.
That's a good point. I'm going to have to try and remember that as I'm reading through and see if Varen ever references it, because you actually see emotion on her face. Even, it breaks through her Aes Sedai calm. And it had a clearly had an impact on her as well.
And let's list the characters it could have an impact on. Rand, obviously. Ingtar, we saw the impact it had. He voiced it. Matt, Perrin, Varen, other important characters, Massima, Uno, Who else was in there?
That's a good point, because we see here in another chapter or two where Massimo talks to Perrin, and Perrin says, I think Massimo's going mad. So we start to see something that's going to come up much bigger down the road.
And Massimo was cast for season 2. So him, Uno, and Ingtar are all on the cast list.
Okay. So Uno didn't die. I didn't go back and rewatch that last scene because
what was he even one of them on the ground? I don't know. I assumed so because of who Loyal was supposed to be with, I think, but
he was one of the ones that was there breaking open the floor to pull out the horn. I'm pretty sure he was.
So hopefully that means Loyal's not dead, but
that would be incredibly stupid. I don't want to say that because I don't want to speak it into existence. All right, little hiccup there to rant and speculate about the series. And what I was going to say, and I kind of brain farted. I was thinking of stuff that happened later. We've already met her because we met her at first in the Great Hunt when they go to the steading. And so in the Amazon series, you could easily kill off Loyal and replace her with Aerith, and then replace him with Aerith, and then you have a female Ogier. And as we all know, the Force is female, and female characters are way better than male characters just because.
I mean, you could have a trans Ogier come in. That'd make it completely up to date. It's a good swimmer too.
They already had the option for trans characters, and they didn't introduce them. Trans character. Okay.
No, it wouldn't be a trans character yet. It would have been the precursor to the trans character. It would have been the what do they call it? The dead gender version of. Bless you. All right. So back to the topic at hand.
Oh, geez. Stupid nose. Right. So that was, I don't even remember how we got there because we were talking about Rand and anxiety.
Yeah, I actually don't remember how we got down that path.
I don't either. But
okay, so from a psychological standpoint, or neuroscience standpoint, everybody's a spectrum of everything, right? Where you are on the spectrum, whether it's a personality type or whether it's a mental illness, right? We all are on the spectrum of narcissism. It's just those that aren't narcissistic are on the left side of the bell curve, where those that are on the right side, right? It wouldn't. I don't even know if anxiety is the only thing we're dealing with here, because we've got a lot of cultural things that come into it, as we were talking about. But it's definitely a major player, because he's got his limbic system basically hijacking his frontal cortex in a way that is like he's almost trying to emotionally talk himself into this fate.
Yeah, and he's also carrying it all internally and on his own, because one, he doesn't feel
disagreeable.
He's very disagreeable. He doesn't feel like he can trust Moraine, and to a large extent he's right. He can't, because she keeps so much to herself and she has her own agendas. But also he has to carry it all internally because, again, big peeve about the first freaking episode of the stupid crappy series, he's a villain. In his mind, the Dragon Reborn is a villain.
Mm-hmm.
How do you talk to people about that?
I see where they tried to do it in the series. Is they tried to use Leandrin as the vessel of explaining why we want to do away with these people. And I don't think they did it well, because they did such a good job of making her a bad person that we needed good people also feeling the same way. Sorry, everyone. Allergies. It's pollen season here in Texas.
Jeez.
Which is not bad for me. I do worse when the humid air comes in, when the Gulf air comes in.
it's probably more than just allergies because it's been going on all freaking week. And for all I know, I'm about to turn into a cyborg cop because it's the Omnicorp variant. I doubt it because it's not going down into my throat. I thought it was, but it's just staying all up here and it's annoying.
Well, and there's other airborne illnesses that still exist in this world. COVID isn't everything.
Really?
So it could be allergies, could be a mixture of things. It could be, an infection that hijacked your original immune response to the allergies. So
well, let's put a pin in this because I'm actually going to sock you back to this Rand's descent into madness and the anxiety and stuff because there's even more going to it, and we're about to kind of see an example of it here in a little bit.
Well, and we're talking Perrin too, and he is trying to console Rand while he's still going through his own mind fuck of am I a product of the dark? Because we grew up thinking wolves killed our sheep. Wolves bad, right? Wolves have to be something not good.
I think he's
he had a guide.
He did. I think he has kind of acknowledged, accepted that it's not a thing of the dark, but it is something that makes him less human.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's true.
That's a major part of his anxiety and his difficulty in accepting. And then we get a bit of a tease here at the end because we talk about dreams again. And that's going to be a major part of this opening section. These first 8 or 9 chapters here is about dreams. And we're about to go from the kind of general to the very specific. As Perrin is going to start to see the wolf dream and understand the wolf dream. Okay, so jump to page 57 because we're talking about Perrin a lot because this is from his perspective, and here's a really good introduction to. Is this where I was gonna? No, not yet. Into Perrin's character and how they screwed it up in the series, but I'll get more to that later. But he's talking to Min, and he's trying to convince her. Look, I've got a little bit of coin, not much. I'll give it to you. You need to get out of here. You don't need to be wrapped up in all of this. And Min tells him, I knew an old Ilianer woman once, she said slowly. When she was young, her mother arranged a marriage for her with a man she had never even met. They do that down in Ilion sometimes. She said she spent the first 5 years raging against him and the next 5 scheming to make his life miserable without his knowing who was to blame. It was only years later, she said, when he died, that she realized he really had been the love of her life. I don't see what that has to do with this. So my thought here, the thing that came to me is that for Perrin, problems are puzzles. And puzzles, even if it's one of these, ridiculous 5,000 piece, the colors are all blend together and it's a pain in the butt, but they do eventually all go together. Eventually, all of the pieces fit, even if it takes you days to figure it out.
Unless you happen to get that one that has that one piece missing.
Ah, yes. One of the many reasons I hate puzzles. But to Perrin, I hate those kind of puzzles. I like logic puzzles. I like the crosshatch things of this and the matrices. Anyway, so every problem is a puzzle, and all puzzles eventually fit neatly together. The problem for Perrin is that life isn't neat. So you do have missing pieces. You do have edges that don't match up, and because that's his personality, his way of viewing the world, this exchange here between him and Min is, now we know as the reader, because we've seen Min's point of view, we can more easily put ourselves in her shoes because we've literally been in her shoes, seeing the world through her eyes, because at this point we've had a few small sections of the books through her eyes from her point of view. So we get it, but Perrin doesn't. And this is a great example of how people can just talk right past each other because they don't have the same worldview.
Well, and Perrin would be a chess player. And I don't know if we talked about this when we talked game theory in our regular episodes. But the original game theorists, one of the things that kind of sparked their intrigue was the fact that they were poker players. And they
I'd
believed
forgotten that,
yeah, they believed life was more like poker than it was like chess, because chess you could have a contingency plan for every move, but there's only certain moves that can happen. Whereas poker has it has a lot of strategy and a lot of statistical analysis, but at the same time it's still subject to randomness.
Yes.
And the greatest poker players always go back and analyze their game with each other as teams and say what was random bad luck and what was a mistake I made. And then did I make a mistake to their colleague because I have my own bias on what I like to play. I like to play a 2-7 more often because people will think I'm bluffing or something like that. So it's with Perrin, you got someone who wants everything to be a chess match. In this book, it would be the game of stones. That's why I think Matt actually is a more intriguing character, but I think he did kind of play him a little bit wrong, because they made him more of a stones player kind of later, when they should have emphasized his poker play, his card play. And in fact, he shied away from cards because he thought it wasn't random enough. So they used dice and stones to make him a complete guy instead of actually having him a poker player. When I'm sure Jordan should have known that the original game theorists were poker players. But back to Perrin. He wants everything to fit in a neat box. So he's conscientious and agreeable.
I'm going to rant about that a little bit more later, because we're going to get an even more, I think, stark example of how they screwed up the character in the series. I'll go back to it. Okay, but the next two chapters,
like this?
Yeah. So chapters 4 and 5, I kind of feel run together because this is Perrin falling into the dream that we know as the wolf dream. If you've read ahead, he doesn't quite know that yet. And then he wakes up and we have the combat. But so one of the first things that jumped out at me is on page 66, where he's talking to who we know as Balsamon. And I think he kind of retroactively gets it a little later when he's kind of watching some interactions later. But
okay, I know why I'm disconnected now. This is the hardback.
Yes, I am using the paperback version when I give.
Yeah. Okay. So 60. Okay. Yeah. 60. Whatever is way ahead in the story for that.
Chapter 4. Chapter 4.
Shadow sleeping. Right. No.
Right at the beginning of chapter 4, when he falls asleep, he falls into the wolf dream, and he is the world of dreams, and Balsamon is there, kind of in an in-common room, and he's just chatting amiably. This is one of the few things I think they got right. It was just annoying because of how much they rushed it, which was Balsamon's ability to soft play someone. He can be terrifyingly powerfully evil, but in these dream sequences we do see where he, and we have seen in a number of the dream sequences, especially from Rand's point of view, where he does push hard. But then we also see where he soft plays this, and it's just sit, have a drink with me. Everything's fine. Everything's normal. Let me, he's not being combative. He's being seductive.
Okay, so we got Balsamon, who we've seen in some conflicts already, but obviously he's still alive even post that dramatic scene in the Great Hunt at the end. And we can draw parallels to kind of some of the tactics of like a Lucifer or the devil from the Bible, right? Where he's a tempter, not necessarily just a murderer, right? And again, we go back to what's good and evil, what the dark ones in the books kind of motive is. When we talk about intent, he may think he has the right intent, because he may think the wheel is what's not allowing humanity to be what it is, or the world to be what it could be, the universe to be what it could be realistically.
It's why he and the Dark One so desperately want to. The real victory for them is turning the Creator's chosen one to their side.
Yeah, and so we go to the one of the other traits of the Dark Triad with the psychology is he's got that Machiavellian personality. So he is a means to an end kind of person. Killing we call evil, but killing is a means to an end for him, because we have to do this thing in secret. Someone finds out, we have to kill them. Boom. It's purely utility. Everything's purely utility, because the end goal, I think, is right, which is the Creator held everything back by creating this wheel, and now we need to break it. And Balsamon is kind of like a very personified version of that in this state. So he doesn't want to kill Perrin. He doesn't want to not kill Perrin. He wants Perrin to be out of the way because he's in the way. And he has deemed the best path to do that is convince Perrin to do what he loves. Work with his hands, create puzzles, and become a great clockmaker or blacksmith or something along those lines. So he doesn't necessarily want to kill Perrin. He doesn't want to not kill Perrin. It's just, what's the best approach? And that's with everybody in his books. He doesn't want to kill, but he also doesn't not want to kill.
You answered my question before I asked it, which was, how does Balsamon know about the axe hammer conflict? And he doesn't necessarily know, except that he is smart enough psychologically that he can tell, he understands how to tempt someone.
Reading the audience.
Yeah.
Reading the audience.
Versus then a little, the next sequence of dreams is then Lanfear, who is very rigid in her seduction. She also wants to seduce, but unlike Balsamon, she wants it on her terms.
Mm-hmm.
So as you were saying, Balsamon doesn't care how he gets you out of the way, as long as you're out of the way. Lanfear,
now we're pushing to that narcissism, because that adds an element of control.
Incredibly narcissistic. You saw a glimpse of it in The Great Hunt.
And it's hard not to be when you're considered the most beautiful woman in the world. You're one of the smartest people in the world. You have this incredible power that is supernatural at your ability. It would be almost impossible to not be narcissistic at that point.
So they're going to get into it more down there. They talked a little bit about it in The Great Hunt when they were talking about the powers, the five weaves, and the one power in the male and the female half of the source. And Jordan goes into it in greater detail down the road as Rand especially and the girls start to learn more about the power. But men typically are stronger than women physically, and the same holds true for the one power. Lanfear is so powerful that the only people more powerful than her are a few men. It is thought that Lews Therin, Rand, Balsamon, and that might be it.
Maybe Demandred.
Yeah, maybe Demandred, Samuel, a few of the others, but she is so powerful in the one power that she is a category above other women, to the extent that there are only a few men that are stronger than she is. So it kind of like you were talking about with Niall, is that there is good reason for him to be confident. He has demonstrated that on the battlefield. So there is good reason for Lanfear to be confident in her power, because she's incredibly powerful. But then you combine that with this absolutely extreme narcissism, and you get a very interesting and very scary bad guy.
Well, it creates blind spots in that person, just like we talked about with Niall. So it's when you have a blind spot, bad things happen because your competence kind of falls to the side.
You see that in this scene. She puts this gilded armor on Perrin and starts talking to him about glory, and that's not who he is. That is not going to work. It's a sharp contrast to what Ballsman tries to do, which is don't worry about the axe. You were born to have a hammer in your hand. This is who you are. This is what you want. This is what you love. Now it doesn't work because Perrin also has this strong sense of duty. But it is tempting. He does want that. He does want that hammer. He does want that simplicity. As he tells Lanfear, I'm just a blacksmith. He doesn't want this gilded armor. That's not who he is. But she can't see that because she wants to turn him on her own terms.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of this chapter, then we kind of get a real glimpse of the weirdness of the world of dreams. It's not just that reflection of the real world, as kind of we were in with the common room of the inn or whatever, but we go back to something I don't think we've seen in a while, which is that weird blackness, that kind of in between space that now we understand is part of the world of dreams. But when we saw it at the very beginning, way back in some of the early chapters of the world, we didn't know what this was. And now you realize, oh, this is part of the wolf dream. This is part of the world of dreams, because this is where Perrin ends up. And he's spying on these people, one of which he realizes is Ballsman, which clues you in that these people he's talking to are Forsaken. And he's still fighting the wolves and fighting the wolf dream. But not totally irrationally, right? Because you see here in a few pages, as we get into the next chapter and we get into the fight, that when the wolves come in, it's page 77 in the paperback. When the wolves come in and join the fight, there's a line here. The wolves filled him until he could barely remember being a man. And to a certain extent, that helps him, because Perrin isn't the fighter that Rand or Matt or Lan is. And yet he's able to take down a Madral one-on-one, which we know from numerous encounters beforehand, and we'll see again in encounters down the road. That's really freaking hard to do. Mm-hmm. It's hard just to come out of a fight like that alive, let alone actually kill the Madral. But by becoming the wolf, he's able to do it.
It's an interesting take on our cognitive versus our limbic state. He goes completely fight or flight. Mm-hmm. in those moments. So the wolves kind of a representation of going fight or flight, where he is in that pure limbic adrenaline state, which we do have some inherent ability based on. Everybody talks, he hears about the granny that picked up a car to save the child, but on the other end of it, you don't hear about she popped every tendon in her body, and that's kind of the state he goes into. So yes, there's a lot of risk to that, but with aggression can also have great reward.
With aggression and guile, because he doesn't stand and dance the forms like Lan or Rand would. He fights like a wolf. He fights dirty. He hamstrings and then kills it while it's down.
Well, and it's also important that he is a very physically hardy individual, because that type of fighter from a mixed martial artist standpoint, from where I came from, you can walk into a few punches and still win the day. And that's more of the Perrin. Where a Matt, he's not frail, but he's compared to Perrin, he is.
Well,
compared to the great fighters of the world.
Before the Madral, there was a Trolloc that he literally had to ground and pound because it tackled him and he lost his axe and he had to ground and pound the thing, and he was able to come away from it.
He was like, remember Chris Lieben from back in the Ultimate Fighter days, the original season, where he would get his face was already flat from being punched in the face so much, and he won one fight. I'm trying to remember the guy's name. kind of a Samoan looking
Mhm.
fellow, but he was known for his knockout power, and he hit Lieben a couple times, kind of staggered him a little bit, but then all of a sudden Lieben just started and knocked him out. And when he was being interviewed after, they were like, did he have you on the ropes, and did he have you back? He goes, no, there's like a button right here, and when you hit there, I go and that's how he won fights. I mean, and he had a very successful career. Even he got knocked out by Anderson Silva, who was obviously a superior fighter. And once you get knocked out once, it kind of cascades after that. But he had a long, very prosperous career, getting punched in the face and reacting with and it worked for him. And that's kind of the Perrin. He's an elite level brawler at this point, because he's just hardy in physical form.
But he still has this binary choice of shove the wolves away, don't let them in, or become the wolf. Not use the inner wolf, but become the wolf. And we're about to see again that's not wholly irrational, because here in like 2 chapters we're going to meet Simeon and his brother and see that no, Perrin, you do have to be careful.
Is it that quick?
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, we're almost there.
Well, again, we've talked about it in other episodes. You don't want the limbic system to always hijack your decision making.
But we still, so a few pages later, 82 in the
what's the chapter called?
It's still the same chapter, Nightmares Walking.
Okay.
It's after the fight. Perrin has gone to find Rand, and Rand is talking about how I didn't do a darn thing. All I did was sit here and fight myself. And we see a parallel between, because Perrin, there's this conflict with Perrin, and there's a parallel between his guilt and Rand's guilt, because Rand feels guilty and frustrated because he didn't do anything except fight with himself, when if he would have been able to grasp hold of Sidon and control it, he could have annihilated these Trollocs relatively easily, instead of now we have a number of Shinarans dead or injured, and could have been much worse. But Perrin also knows if I had listened to the wolves, if I had sought them out when I felt that tickling in the back of the mind, they knew there were Trollocs here. That's why they were here, because they could smell, sense, whatever, that the twisted ones, the Neverborn, are here in the mountains, and they could have warned me, because they were already coming, because they had sensed it. And if I would have listened, I could have given warning sooner. And
I think we have a good moment before that, though, because you have the moment where Perrin stares down Uno.
Oh yeah.
And we talk about development with Rand being a leader. Well, it is also important to not underestimate Perrin's role in becoming a leader in his own right, and how he develops, because he is such an introvert.
Yeah.
But he is also, like you said, duty driven, and he has to overcome his agreeableness and introversion in order to be a leader. And this was a moment where, again, the wolves came and fought for them. The wolves tried to warn him, and you brought up the guilt right there. And that guilt was strong enough for him to take a stand against someone who very much in life experience and almost in stature, because Uno was not in the show because he's this little midget guy, but he's supposed to be
a big
this guy, he's the epitome of heavy cavalry,
big buff grizzled warrior.
That
if Perrin had not been in that moment, and we've seen before that Perrin defers to guys like that.
And then you have the moment with Perrin defers to even anybody. He defers to, he wants to defer to Bran Alver multiple times later. Who's just a fat innkeeper, and so he has to overcome that. But then you have the moment with him and Min too. where Min is trying to draw something out of him, but he starts getting stubborn and pulling back, and then you have his moment with Rand. But yeah, I thought that was important because he did have that moment with Uno, and we do know he has to develop as a leader himself.
So the next important scene to me, the very end of this chapter, when Lan snaps at Rand, because Min mentions that. So exhausted, the warder said, she has cared for everyone else, but there's no one to take her fatigue. I will put her to bed. There's Rand, Min said slowly, but the warder shook his head. It isn't that I do not think you would try, sheepherder, he said, but you know so little you might soon kill her as helper. That's right, Rand said bitterly. I'm not to be trusted. Luce there and Kinslayer killed everyone close to him. Maybe I'll do the same before I am done. Pull yourself together, sheepherder, Lan said harshly. The whole world rides on your shoulders. Remember you're a man and do what needs to be done. The reason this jumped out at me is something we've talked about already, and you're going to see a lot more of down the road. You're going to see it very explicitly, actually, the analogy come up at the end of this book when Perrin goes to work in a smithy. And that is the contrast between hard and strong. That analogy of metalworking, where you make wrought iron and it's very hard, but it's not strong. You can hit it just right and it will crack, because it's also very the balance, the trade-off between making something hard is that it is brittle, versus a softer metal is paradoxically stronger because it has some give to it. And this is something I don't think I've really thought of until this read through, which is that one of Rand's problems and the way he acts, besides all the things we've already talked about, is that his primary guide is Lan. And we've kind of mentioned this before in other contexts as well, when we're talking about relationships, is that you need someone who's complementary. And Lan is not complementary to Rand because Rand and Lan are so similar. So what you have is
he's wiser in the world, but he's not.
Yes,
he's not a different voice.
What you have here is hard making hard. It's hard and hard. So they're just making each other harder, rather than Rand needs his Moiraine. Moiraine softens Lan and helps him be strong instead of hard. Were it not for Moiraine, he would already be dead or getting close to it, because he would just be in the blight, constantly fighting this battle he can never win and knows he can never win. And he would probably be doing
I would say there are other characters that are more important for that softening than Moiraine was
later, for sure.
But I think the way she's acting now, she doesn't play well into that role because she's so secretive. He doesn't trust her.
Yes.
So he may need her, but she's not playing that role at this moment.
It becomes quite a contrast later when we have others entering Lan's life, but she's not Lan. They are complementary to each other. That they do also play into each other's blind spots because they are both so driven and focused on a single goal that it reinforces their own blinders. And we'll see how that changes down the road for both of them. But Rand, one of the reasons he starts to act like an a-hole is because he doesn't have his Moiraine. He doesn't have someone for a long time who helps soften him.
Well, he doesn't have a lot of things, and it actually emphasizes the importance of not only mother-father roles, but friend roles and work acquaintance roles, and how different people play in your mind. Because he one thing Rand never had was his mother.
Yeah,
but he gets that later. Not to name the character because that would semi be spoilery, but he gets his mother later. He gets female influences in his life in form of relationships. He has Lan, who's like the hard ass, more like the hard ass uncle than the father. You know, Tam was his father, and Tam does show up in other roles as well. So it's, you start to see what we need all of these people in our lives. So the whole shut people out of your lives, treat yourself mindset is the opposite of mental health.
And understand that Rand's about to run off, and he's going to be on his own pretty much through this whole book. And keep that in mind when we see how Rand acts in subsequent books, because I think that's a big deal that I hadn't really considered before. Is Rand spends pretty much this whole book, and it's a good chunk of in-world time that he's on his own and facing some pretty serious stuff, and it's just feeding, it's just creating that negative feedback loop.
Think of the physical distance they've already traveled and how long that's taken. He's about to travel the equivalent of that distance in this book to get where they end up. Gosh, there was a point I was going to bring up. It was I brought up the development of Rand as a leader in the past. So he took care of Matt. That was important.
Yep.
Then he took care of Loyal and Huron, and then Loyal, Huron, and Serene. And then he took care of the hunt party, and he's developing. And now we get to the book where I said he screws it all up. Yeah, because he takes the stance of, I need to be alone. And so he was developing, and he turns it all on its head because he wants seclusion, solidarity.
Well, let's go ahead and jump to that. So the next chapter, it's page 90 in the paperback, is his letter that he leaves when he runs off.
Is that one called The Hunt Begins?
Yep. Okay. And so a few pages in, you'll see there's a section of italicized text there, which is his letter that he leaves when he runs off. What I do because there is no other way. Again, he's pushing himself into binary choices. He is hunting me again. And this time one of us has to die, I think. There is no need for those around me to die also. Too many have died for me already. I do not want to die either, and will not if I can manage it. There are lies in dreams and death, but dreams hold truth too.
Well, and this is not only a testament to his stubbornness and his unwillingness to listen, but it's also his ignorance, because the Dark One can touch all. It doesn't matter where he goes. He can isolate himself all he wants, but the reach is still universal.
Okay, so the next thing that jumped out at me is after reading the letter and talking about dreams, there's this exchange with Perrin. And I think it builds on what you were talking about with the way he stares down Uno, is he's becoming more self-confident, but I don't think he would see it that way. He's simply doing what needs to be done, and just instinctively someone needs to stand up to Moiraine, because Rand's not there to do it anymore, and someone needs to stand up to her. And the stuff he says, and I think is just in his mind, it's just stuff that needs to be said. But so it's 91 in my book. Shortly after the letter there, you split hairs and lay false trails, Moiraine, Perrin snorted. If he is what you say he is, did it ever occur to you that he might know what he has to do better than you? He is what he is, she repeated firmly, but I must keep him alive if he is to do anything. He will fulfill no prophecies dead. And even if he manages to avoid dark friends and shadow spawn, there are 1,000 other hands ready to slay him. Where's my food? You didn't bring me any food. So someone send me some fried yummies. You're still muted there, homie.
I'm going to resist the urge to eat it in front of everybody, but it's sitting right here, and it smells delicious.
All right. Well, so they're both right here and they're both wrong, but they're both being so stubborn, it takes forever for them to strike that balance. That and we kind of mentioned this in the Great Hunt, in that Watchers chapter. well, no, not even in the Watchers chapter. It was in her when Moiraine is alone with Siwan and talking about, we make plans, but the pattern does what it wants. And so on one level, she understands that, but on another level, she can never let it go. She's in a lot of ways as rigid as Rand is. It's why they clash so much in the Great Hunt and the Dragon Reborn, and even into the Fires of Heaven for a bit, and then we'll see something interesting. But they're both so rigid in that I must do this. I'm the one. In Rand, it's I'm the one who has to face the Dark One, and in Moiraine, it's I'm the one who has to make sure he gets there and fulfills his destiny. And they're both so rigid that they clash, and they can't find that balance of, Rand instinctively kind of knows what he has to do. Rand is going to get kind of hints and guidance from the pattern from being Ta'veren, but he doesn't necessarily understand how to go about doing those things that he instinctively knows he needs to do, because he doesn't know the world enough. He doesn't know the world well enough. That's where Moraine's supposed to come in, but instead of being complementary, she's always trying to take control. And so is Rand, which is why he runs off on his own.
In defense of the young boys, though, if they were to go home right at this moment, back to their village, they would be the most wise in the world people in that village. Yep. And that's got to be in the back of their mind. Like, I know more now. I know what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. And then you get into it and you're like, oh shit, I didn't know what I thought I knew.
Yeah. There's a kind of a saying in intelligence and military circles of the unknown knowns. It's you try and know what you don't know, which sounds contradictory, but it's really
because you also don't know what you don't know.
And that's the stuff that scares these people, military and intelligence planners, is what do I not know that I don't know? Because that's what's going to bite you in the butt. But where wisdom comes from, and where having backup plans comes from, is knowing, okay, there are these various possibilities, and I don't have intelligence on that. So I need to be very wary of that and cognizant of that, of these plans that I'm making could be interrupted by one of these things here. And then, of course, there's always the real shadowy stuff of I don't even know what I don't know. And that's where things get scary.
even in things that you've experienced in your life. Like, so I've gotten to a point I haven't been keeping up with my certifications because I have a master's degree and I've been just doing private business, so I actually haven't needed them. But I've come to a point where I think I need them again, and I'm like, well, I'll go ahead and retest. And part of me wants to say, well, I've been doing this so long, I can just go take the test and it's fine. But I don't know what I don't know. I don't know what I've hit the erase button on that's textbook.
Yeah.
And so I need to look at the textbook to say, oh yeah, I haven't used that thing in a while, probably because it's, the difference between textbook and real life, but I still need that knowledge to pass the test. Yes. And so I have to go back and review the material because I don't know what I hit the erase button on because it's been erased.
Yeah. And even that textbook stuff, even if well, this isn't how it works out in practice, it's still useful to have that template. Right. So it's always good to refresh those kind of things just in general, but I digress. Okay, so here's where I was going to sock you back to Perrin's character. This is so the end of this chapter, the end of chapter 6 is a lot of fun, because there's this awkward moment for a second where Perrin thinks Min is coming on to him. And Min, I like you, but you sort of remind me of my sisters. I mean, the flow stumbled to a halt as she raised her head to look at him, eyebrows arched. She wore a small smile. Why, Perrin, you must know that I love you. She stood there, watching his mouth work, then spoke slowly and carefully. Like a brother, you great wooden-headed lummox. The arrogance of men never ceases to amaze me. You all think everything has to do with you, and every woman has to desire you. Perrin felt his face growing hotter. I didn't. He cleared his throat. What did you see about a woman? And then etc. so forth. And she starts to storm off, and it suddenly dawns on him. It's Rand, isn't it? And the reason I'm talking back to Perrin's character is he does have this blind spot of everything is a puzzle. Everything has to fit together, and he's going to work through the puzzle. But he's not an idiot. Yeah, it took him a while to get there because they were talking past each other, because his worldview was making it hard for him to see where Min was coming from until it became more explicit. But then it all clicked into place.
He's also smart enough to take a bunch of random patterns and see where they all connect.
Yep.
In real time.
Yep. And we have, do you have sharing on for me?
Yes.
All right. So we have referenced this before, and I'm going to share a clip of it. Oop, share sound.
Well, while my face is small, I might take a bite of this.
Take out of that pocket. There's nothing in the pocket, George.
I can barely hear it. I don't know how it's coming through.
George, that's in my mouth. But I didn't kill it, George. Honest, I found it, Dad.
Give it here.
George, leave me have it.
Give it here. What do you want with a dead mouse anyway?
I was just petting it with the fingers while we was walking along.
Yeah.
So this is Lenny. I don't know why it's so quiet when I share the screen. It wasn't that bad when I was just listening to it.
Of Mice and Men, right?
Yep. Of Mice and Men. You know, there's, if you want to go watch some clips of it.
Two great actors, by the way.
Two phenomenal actors. Yeah, that's I think that was it. No, he did some stuff in the 80s.
Gary Sinise and who else was it?
Malkovich.
Yeah, that's
Malkovich is Lenny, and it's a great movie, and Lenny is a big, dumb, lovable dummy.
You should have played the Tommy Boy version of that.
I didn't even think to look for it.
My pretty new pet. And I stroke it and I love it. And
he's mentally retarded, but incredibly strong.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of the great tragedies of both American literature and cinema. If you haven't, read and watch it. But that is what we're referencing when you talk about how they made
somewhere.
Lenny.
It's in this shelf.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what we're talking about, is that's kind of what they made him in the first season.
Well, it's Hollywood. They did it with The Blind Side too.
Yes. Yeah, I'd forgotten about that, about how he what's his face? I'm brain farting on the guy's name. He didn't really like the movie because of the way they portrayed him as kind of a dummy.
He's like, I have a college degree. I don't just play football. You got to be smart to play my position at left tackle. And
his goal is to be his life goal after football is to be a judge. He's going to law school.
Mm-hmm.
He's not a dummy.
Yeah. I trained a offensive tackle NFL guy. He was a sharp dude too, but you have to be smart to play that position. So
one of my favorite interviews with NFL interviews is Travis Frederick, former center for the Dallas Cowboys. He is incredibly sharp. It's a shame that illness, I can't remember what he had. He had some sort of genetic disease that cut his career a few years short. But he's a great interview if you want to listen to an NFL lineman talk about the complexities of blocking schemes. Go find some interviews of Travis Frederick. And he's a big guy too. I mean, obviously he's an NFL center, so he's a big guy. He's not a Lenny. That's
what was that
that's
movie,
what they did here.
The movie they had to take scenes out of The Program. I think that's what it's called. That was one of my beefs with that movie was they had the guy, the linebacker that got injured and then had nothing because he couldn't even read. You don't, especially that position, quarterback and linebacker have to be the smartest guys on the field.
You typically see that more with running backs, honestly.
Wide receivers.
Running backs, wide receivers.
T.Y. Hilton is an idiot.
occasionally secondary if it's someone who's just like pure physical talent and not
Yeah,
like
but those always fizzle out.
yeah,
They really do, because there's a lot of complexity to coverage schemes as well. But the wide receivers, they just got to know their routes and be able to hit their steps quicker than the guy in front of them. But specifically to linebackers, is like he was a middle linebacker, so that's the quarterback of the defense, and they should have at least picked a different position for that, unless there was a real guy in mind who happened to be a savant that couldn't do other things intellectually, but he could do that. But I was just flabbergasted by that, having been a linebacker and not being a physical specimen as a young, as a youth.
It's a great analogy, because we're going to see that in one of my favorite scenes in the entire series is going to happen at the end of this book. And I texted you about it when I was reading it, so I won't go too much into it, but suffice it to say, blacksmithing is a highly technical skill. You're talking, you're talking about medieval chemistry and physics. There's a lot to keep track of, along with just the physical ability of both being strong enough to wield the hammer, maneuver the metal while being delicate enough to be an artist, right? So it's an incredibly complex craft. So
especially if you live in an area where you have to have a diverse range of items you make. If you're just making horseshoes the rest of your life, repetition can get you there. But if you got to make horseshoes, butter knives, armor, pieces for gears for clocks, and all of these things, then you're going to have to be a very highly intellectually developed individual.
Right. And it matters not just because not just because we're grumpy old geezers complaining it's not like the book. All right, here's why it matters, because let's jump to chapter 8. So chapter 7 is just
I'm going to give a surface example of why it matters, because this is part of it. It's one part of it, but it is part of it. It makes him uninteresting.
Yeah.
It makes him completely uninteresting. Perrin in the series, first episode I was okay with. After that, I was like, he could be there or not. And they threw Matt aside, apparently, sort of ish. But Perrin was the one you're just like, okay, whatever. Yeah, okay, now he's got golden eyes. Okay. Ooh, we saw that come out of with Min. There's no depth to him. He's just this
Hulk
big
smash.
dumb animal that is trying not to be an animal. That's it.
Yeah. And if you go back to Eye of the World and you look at that scene where he was going to throw the axe away, that's an incredibly powerful scene from his point of view, thinking through, do I have the courage to do this? Because I don't want Egwene, who is like a sister to me, to have to suffer what these animals are when these flocks of ravens get to it.
And I have to
confess, I hate myself
I didn't get
for that
out
thought
of it when I read it, but as we're talking through it, which is actually kind of cool with this whole little segment of our podcast, is I didn't get that out of it when I read it, but then when we talked about it out loud, I was like, man, that was actually one of the most powerful scenes in the whole series.
And we're about to get another one here in chapter 8, which is Jara. So chapter 7 is
this one was powerful even in reading to it.
Yes.
Yeah.
But you don't get that if you don't have the 2 books of setup of who Perrin is. We've been going through this for a while, and now we have this setup of, we really understand Perrin, and we're looking at this through Perrin's eyes, and you get to Jara, which first we get some interesting things about chance and the pattern and Taverin, because you've got all these weddings that all of a sudden happen, like everybody who's unmarried is getting married all of a sudden all at once. So you have chance kind of running wild here.
Well, and so we're going to connect things again too, because I talked about the need, but also this is where emotion plays into it. Think of Rand's state of mind at the moment. And it's at a different place than it was before Falm, and even before the events of the night we just talked about. So he's in this almost schizophrenic state at the moment, and he's going through this, and all of these things are just exploding. His emotional well-being is tied to everything that goes on, and the power that comes out. He's actually manipulating the pattern around him because he's in that state, not just because he is he.
Then as we so that the chapter starts off with we're going to see some interesting things about chance and the pattern and Rand's influence on it, and then all of a sudden Simeon knows what an Aes Sedai is, and she wants him to heal his brother. And we go out to see his brother, and his brother is a wild animal. His brother is in a kennel, acting like a wolf. Golden eyes, can't talk, is snapping and growling, literally breaking his teeth on the gate. And this is everything that Perrin has feared. This is justification for his pushing the wolves away, trying to create this solid wall between him and the wolves, because if he doesn't, he will somehow turn into this. And so now we actually see the justification for why he is acting the way he is. But then, much like when he stares Uno down and we're going to bury the dead wolves with our dead because they came to fight us, we see Perrin's humanity and his compassion, because he reaches out to try and talk to Simeon's brother, and there's nothing but wolf there. It's just scenes of running and hunting like a wolf, and
which I think is a little bit of a failure here. I mean, it builds the character like he intends, but he talks to other wolves and they have humanity to them. So there should be no reason that he could talk to Noam in the wolf way, and there be that same personification, even though he's all the way gone, because all the way gone is wolf, but he can talk to Hopper and Dapple and all of these other wolves.
My rationalization for it is that, but he's not a wolf. So he has lost his humanity, which means he's lost his consciousness. But
yeah, but actual wolves have consciousness.
You're right.
Yeah.
But he doesn't have that to fall back on. His consciousness was human, and it's gone. So all he has now is instinct. Now, maybe if he's had some time to run with the wolves, once he's set free, maybe
or
then
had a
that will
guide.
develop, or had a guide. Yeah. You know, maybe he will find a pack and be able to, you know, become more of a wolf, in that he's not just acting on instinct, but he does have that consciousness that we see with other wolves. So one can hope that there's a happy ending for Gnome here, but at the least, the sad happy ending is Perrin saying, you can't keep a wolf caged. He will just be miserable until he rots away. Let him run free. But it's your choice, because he's your brother. And then the ending here, if you don't have goosebumps when you read this last half page or so, then something is wrong with you, and seek professional help. But when he's talking to Simeon, and he finds out that it wasn't just Rand, it wasn't just a redhead that the Whitecloaks were looking for. One of the names the Whitecloaks had was a fellow named Perrin Abira, a blacksmith. They said he had yellow eyes and runs with wolves. You can see why I didn't want them to know about Gnome. Perrin turned his head enough to look at Simeon over his shoulder. Do you think this Perrin Abira is a dark friend? A dark friend wouldn't care if my brother died in a cage. I suppose she found you soon after it happened, in time to help. I wish she'd come to Jara a few months ago. Perrin was just saying that he had ever compared the man to a frog. And I wish she could have done something for him. Burn me, I wish she could. Suddenly it burst on him that the whole village must know about his eyes. Simeon, would you bring me something to eat in my room? Master Herod and the rest might have been too taken with staring at Loyal to notice his eyes before, but they would surely if he ate in the common room. Of course, and in the morning too. You don't have to come down until you're ready to get on your horse. You're a good man, Simeon, a good man. Simeon looked so pleased that Perrin felt ashamed all over again.
Yeah, they kind of get goosebumps this time around too.
And the power of that scene is because of what we've been ranting about this whole time and talking about of the setup of who Perrin is. That all of that is it's a soft, quiet scene. It's kind of my rant about how so much of movies now to be emotional is to be shouty, and that's why I played that clip of the tears in the rain from Blade Runner, because it is a very soft, quiet, but powerfully emotional scene. And there's no shouting, there's no chewing the scenery. Another good example is the end of Star Trek II, because goodness knows William Shatner can chew the scenery with the best of them. And yet in that scene, it is very subdued. And you get that here at the end because you have, we're back to Perrin, the gentle giant. And because of his thoughtfulness and his compassion and his gentleness, that makes this scene so powerful.
Well, and with Perrin, I think you get a good example of that difference between reactionary empathy and actual true compassion, where the more he thinks it through, the more, I guess, for lack of better of a word, good he becomes. And he actually hates the reactionary portion of that, where he looked at him like a frog, and he felt bad about that part of it, because when he thought it through, he actually felt true compassion for these characters. And then the altruism that went back and forth between them. So I think that it's a pretty good example of that, which is his fight the entire time, the limbic wolf or the cognitive blacksmith.
So chapter 9, Wolf Dreams, this last chapter with Perrin before we cut over to the girls. Here he finally goes to ask questions. He has been scared to open up, even though, again, as we mentioned earlier, he knows Moiraine knows something. He can tell she knows something about his wolfness, but he's kind of been obsessed with Elias. He thinks about him. He mentions him in his mind in those points of view over and over. There had been a man who was able to still be a man, and yet he's kind of put himself in, again, like Rand, into a binary of, I need Elias or I can't do this. I need Elias or I have to just shove all this away. And now you have, and this is kind of why I asked the rhetorical earlier about it when we first see Perrin. Is this something of a shift in his character? And I don't think it was. I think what you had was, when we first see Perrin in chapter 1 and the way he's acting, and kind of he's a little more angry and he's adamantly anti-wolf and all this, it's because when we saw him at the end of the Great Hunt, what we saw was acknowledgement, not acceptance. And there's a big dang difference. So he seemed to be at peace with what he had become, but it was because he had acknowledged it. He'd acknowledged that this is who I am. There's no undoing this. But he hadn't really accepted who and what he was. And there's that contrast and parallel between all three boys, because they all three have to do that on some level at some point.
Yeah, and we'll get to him, but I think Matt was the most embracing of them all. But it was also the least abrasive characteristic to accept, I think. Except that yeah, we'll get to him. We'll get to him
Yeah.
later. I mean,
Well,
he's almost a non-issue in this book because he's pretty much passed out the whole time.
I don't have too much more to say about chapter 9 because there's a lot of stuff here that is really kind of setting up more for later, and it gets kind of spoilery, I think, of some of the stuff you see here in this chapter. I do think
anything that has to do with the wolf dream is spoilers.
Yes.
Because we're dealing with prophecy, right?
The big thing to me that jumps out and is kind of a whoa cool moment is Hopper. Hopper is here, and it is actually Hopper. And we don't know, we don't understand why and how yet, but we know he's there. And so now, because he's accepted, now Perrin's actually found a guide. It doesn't have to be Elias. He's actually found his guide in Hopper. And that is something that is going to be powerful and emotional and cool for books to come. So we're going to start to see it a little bit more in this book, and then big time in the next book of Hopper becomes his guide, since he doesn't have Elias.
Which in the series kind of bugged me because someone made reference to Hopper as, I guess, one of the wolves in the Whitecloak encampment, and like there was no development there at all. I didn't say Hopper in my mind. I just saw a wolf that he talked to, and I guess if you said which wolf was that, I would have probably said, I guess Hopper, because he's the main wolf character in the books. But you don't get that from the show, and if they bring him in now, you're going to be like, oh, that I guess that's the same wolf from that one little scene where they look at each other.
So there's some, I'll just say about this chapter after he talks to Moraine and after he goes into the wolf dream, and then at the very end, even what Rand does here. Rand does something.
I was going to say this is a great example of how dangerous his ignorance is.
Yes,
and how the lack of teachers and guides could unravel the world, to use actually a very pun word that would be a spoiler if we explained it.
Yep. But just keep this stuff in mind for down the road. And I hadn't even thought of that, of ending this chapter the way it does. I have to think that was on purpose because of the way Jordan so carefully structures and crafts things, is that Perrin has found his guide. Perrin has found acceptance. He's finally talked to Moraine. In contrast, we have Rand, who is facing some really dangerous and difficult challenges and fumbling in the dark, trying to figure it out on his own. And how
in the gosh daggum, tried not to curse here, series where Moraine says, okay, go find yourself, and lets him go.
Yeah, because that's in keeping with her character, both in the book and in the series. That's horrible.
Up until that exact moment. Yeah.
Even in the series, we see some of Moraine's character, the kinds of things we've talked about here, about how focused and driven she is, about how I have to be the one to make sure you get to the end and fulfill your destiny. Never mind. See you later. So I don't have a ton to say about the girls. So chapter 10, then we get chapter 10 to like 18, I think it is.
Well, you just kind of got to get a backdrop because Matt's passed out. You can see how bad off he is. You get a little bit of Perrin. You get
chapter
a little bit
10
more
to 18. The first thing. So this opening chapter, chapter 10, I do think there are a couple of important things that happen here. First of all, Egwene, we see her. This is from her point of view, and of course, the last thing we saw and something we talked about is how brittle she is from her time and her physical and emotional torture and conditioning from the Soldam, and what that did to her. And we saw that at the end of the Great Hunt, where Nynaeve is trying to keep everyone together, keep everyone calm, even when the Sanshin are headed in their direction. And Nynaeve is saying, this has nothing to do with us. Keep your head down, keep moving. And Egwene snaps. And here she does it again, because it's going to be we kind of mentioned this of remember this, because this is going to shape Egwene's character for books to come, but it's not something that happens overnight. This trauma will eventually strengthen her. It will condition her.
Well, and again,
But-
it's she parallels not only Rand, but she parallels Perrin as well in a lot of ways. Because again, there are times when we want that limbic response. And there are a lot of times in the near future where something that triggers her based on this experience causes her to become incredibly strong, but it also causes her to make some mistakes.
Yep.
And so this is where trauma can be beneficial or detrimental.
Yes. And this is the last several chapters, or the last several pages of this chapter, 141 to 144 in my book,
Which I want to talk about another character there too when you're done with this.
is when they lash out at the Whitecloaks. Because again, like with the Sanshin, she panics. And I love the way Perrin turns on them and is just completely ignoring Bornhold there and just, just putting them down as a teacher. And the thought I had here when I was rereading this was, what Jordan is showing is how much they've grown in the power, because they were outside of the tower. They were on their own. They were forced to grow, but their growth in the power has far exceeded their growth in wisdom. So they do not yet have that growth in wisdom, which is something that he's setting up, and we're going to see through their scenes in this book.
We can bring in training to this. So physical training, weight training in particular. One of the things that a good coach does is bring back the general prep phase a lot, because that's where you build tendon density. That's where you build connective tissue. That's where you build the things that hold everything together. Whereas the mistake is people stay in performance training, which you can get really strong, really fast, but then you're going to pop your titty like I did. All right. So they got really strong, really fast, but they don't have the base structure yet to be able to do the best possible thing without any kind of adverse reactions to it.
I don't remember where I was reading this a while ago, but I was reading an article along these lines that one of the things that set Arnold apart from the other Olympia competitors, most of these guys come from a powerlifting background, but Arnold never gave that up. That every 6 weeks to 2 months or so, he would reset, and he would take a full week to not do that high volume bodybuilder training, and he would do like a full week of powerlifting training of, high weight, low rep, long rest, and he would use that to kind of reset so that he didn't lose that base strength, and that then would help him in that.
Ronnie Coleman was the same way though. Ronnie Coleman came from a powerlifting background, and he stuck with that as well. Now he hurt himself in the long run, but that's all of those guys. The fact that Arnold didn't, it's probably a testament to the day and age where where mass was a little less emphasized versus symmetry and being a Greek statue, basically.
Yep.
Well, and I made a mistake because I told you this happened and we did the periodization last week, and I do get a little bit more intricate than you have to be. And I'm also kind of typically an unorganized person. And when I looked back at the last year of periodization, I noticed upper body pushes aired more on the side of strength and less on the side of prep. And in fact, it had been, of the last 6 cycles we did, we only spent 1 in prep. And that's one of the errors I made on the way up there. And there were some other errors along the way, and I've identified them all, but or at least most the major players anyways. But that was one of them, is I was neglecting this tendon density prep that ultimately was my demise. So that's where the girls are. They've got a lot of performance training with very little base athleticism.
And that you see that right away, because in the next chapter, once they get into the White Tower, they are set down, they are reset to novice and accepted status, and it is shut up, keep your mouth shut, which Varen repeats a couple of times. Keep your mouth shut and do what you're told. And they have to get back into that mindset.
So let's go back to another character before we move on to the tower. Dain Bornhold. This is a pivotal moment in development because he has not yet gotten the news that he is going to get in a little bit, but he just had a traumatic experience with Aes Sedai. And not only Aes Sedai coming from the area he's going to get the dramatic news about. And so we've got a developing character here with the younger Bornhold. So Bornhold's son. And this is important. This is an important moment. So it's an introduction of a character who in that introduction goes through a dramatic event, and he's about to get news that he's going to put 2 and 2 together incorrectly, but he's still going to put 2 and 2 together with the information.
He already knows.
He already knows?
Yes,
no, because I didn't think he knew till he got back to Amadicia.
No, that's when he gets back to Amadicia. That's when we see the spiral downward that he has had. But this is one of the grown in power but not grown in wisdom, because Egwene opens her mouth and makes things worse, and then Elaine opens her mouth and makes things worse, because Egwene tries to smooth things over and say, I'm sorry, Varen said I will heal you if you want. We have come a long way, all the way from Toman Head. And if I weren't so tired, I never would have. And Varen tries to shut her up because Varen has been around the block and she understands word has traveled ahead of us. We don't know what the situation is, but we have to know that we've traveled so slowly that people have heard some version of what happened on Toman Head. And
you've been around the block. Varen's probably one of the 10 oldest people on the continent other than Forsaken.
And so Bornhold becomes incensed. Toman Head, Falm, you were at Falm. He stumbled back another step and half drew his sword. From the look on his face, Egwene did not know whether he meant to attack or to defend himself. Perrin moved his horse closer to the White Cloak, a hand on his swordbreaker, but the narrow-faced man went on in a rant, spittle flying with his fury. My father died at Falm. Byre told me, you witches killed him for your false dragon. I'll see you dead for it. I'll see you burn. So that's part of the not knowing wisdom. And then Egwene, Varen has just told Egwene to shut up, and she'd made things worse. And then Elaine opens her mouth because she thinks, well, I can make this better.
Which I think when you look at timelines, Byre was in the prologue in Amadicia. And for him to go down and report Amadicia and then still go back up in time for Dain to confront this caravan that went straight from Falme towards Tarbland, that's kind of I mean, they'd have to be riding. So I don't know.
That is right. Yeah, because he goes down and he gives his report to Niall first. And then Niall says, you can go to Tarbland to report, to tell Dain as
now Byre is the type of person to run horses to death, but at the same time, they're still kind of, they're not moving quickly in this little caravan, but they're also moving in a straight line.
Well, presumably Byre could have gone to Ibudar and got a boat, and by ship he could have gotten to Tyr and then up the river to Tarbland quicker than they could have gone over land.
True. Maybe I'm overthinking this. Maybe we're all overthinking this. Oh, then we got our map of Tarbland. Should I bring up them?
It was one of the few things I really liked. Is I like the overview, the big view of Tarbland when you first see it, when they kind of come up on that hill and you see it down below. I thought the sets were really cheap and small when they were actually inside Tarbland, but I did like the art production of how it looked.
Why can't I not get into my
and macro scale in the series. I don't have a ton more to say about the girls unless you do, except for what are we looking for here?
For some reason, it wouldn't let me look unless I shared. Where is it? I sent it to you. There we go.
Oh, jeez.
Did it come up? Is
I
it,
don't-
or is it still?
I'm seeing the whole folder there, but of what things, but I saw the one you were highlighting. Anyway, yes, so
It is where the female half of the source is concentrated.
Yep.
And
So-
the males can't seem to find it.
Oh boy.
Row.
What was I talking about? Oh, the girls and their I do like the conversation, the kind of secret conversation between Egwene and Elaine when they're talking through the little hole in the wall to each other in their rooms. Of Egwene think, I half expected we'd be welcome back as heroes. Yeah, life doesn't work that way. I do like that we see how complicated, convoluted, and political things are, especially in the tower. We start to see the factions here. And I do like the Gray Man chapter because we're starting to layer on top of the suspicion that we already had, that we started to get in the Great Hunt with people looking at each other sideways, wondering who's a dark friend around here. And now we're going to crank that up to 11 with the girls trying to hunt down and figure out who's Black Hajah within the tower.
This is the one I actually wanted to bring up.
Got it.
Oh, Loyal. He's just trying to figure out how to.
He's very knowledgeable. He knows many things.
He wants to, he studies so he can make Aerith happy.
Before we wrap it up here, since we are going to start with Matt waking up next time.
Is that another pun?
Not intentionally, but I'll stand by it. I do think it is interesting the scene where he's healed and he starts speaking in the old tongue, and Perrin and Swan talking about the old blood running strong in him, and it's curious that when he does that, whatever deep within his subconscious or genetic code or history or whatever, soul reborn, what comes out is let me find it here so I can read it exactly. For a time, she said finally, I believe the past and the present were one. He was there and he was here, and he knew who we were. He commanded us to release him. She paused again. I am a free man, Aes Sedai. I am no Aes Sedai meat. That is what he said. And I don't think anything is on accident with Jordan. He ends it there on purpose, because now we're going to cut to Matt, and I think he wants us with that in our mind before we get to Matt and we start to see how Matt is going to develop as a character starting here.
I think that's a good place to stop on this one,
because
then we can get to the Matt Gallagher scene. And
there's a lot of fun stuff that happens with Matt here in these next few chapters, and the not just Matt, but there's a reason why we kind of, in these next few chapters, we kind of cut back and forth between Matt and the girls as they're both eventually leaving Tarbland to go do things, and there's a reason why those stories are woven together, and it gives you a lot of insight into both of their characters, but it's all of their characters, but especially Matt.
All right, so that's a good place to end it here. We're gonna do. I think we should do this one in a part 1, part 2 again. So I'll stop it here and then
Okay.
we'll start re-recording. For those that want to keep going with part 2, we're going to talk a wee bit of social issues and then a little bit of fitness in that second part. I think I'm going to try to be brief with the social issues. So
Yeah, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole too far.
well, I don't think we need to, and you'll see why with my
Okay.
explanation. All right, so keep reading, guys. If you want to stick around, click on part 2, like, subscribe, send us to your friends. And again, we'll always make it clear when we're doing a Wheel of Time episode in the title. So these I'm trying to make the titles not as wordy, so I'm going to just say the Dragon Reborn instead of Wheel of Time, Dragon Reborn. So let me know if that's helping with the search results and everything from those looking on the outside in. All right, anything else?
Nope.